Good evening and welcome to another edition of the Kaufman Corner. With you as always, the good doctor, Dr. Rany Jazayerli, of course, one of the co-founders of Baseball Prospectus, co-author for years of Rob and Rany on the Royals, and then, of course, the author of Rany on the Royals. You've seen him on The Athletic, The Ringer. You've seen him in what else? I always forget.
Grantland. I had my time at Grantland, yes.
Grantland, yes. All over is the great Rany Jazayerli. My name is Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB. That's really the only place you've ever been able to find me for about the last 20 years
That's
or so.
all you need, Soren.
Yeah, 810WHB.com if you like to check out my radio show from 2 to 6 p. If you are new to the Kaufman Corner podcast, let us say welcome. If you're catching us via the pod, we stream live Sunday nights at 10 p.m. Off-season, we are going to have the Kaufman Corner pod, maybe a little housekeeping here, first of all. The Kaufman Corner podcast will continue each and every week. I don't, we probably won't go 85 minutes as we've done sometimes in the off-season, probably not as much to chew on, but we will be weekly. I don't know if we're always going to be Sunday at 10. I don't know. There's going to be a little bit more flexibility, so we'd encourage everybody to be a little bit flexible with us as the off-season brings different challenges, but we will bring you weekly Royals content, juicy Royals content, spicy hot takes.
I just want to say, as a child or teenager growing up, if I could have had weekly Royals content all winter long, I would have been the happiest boy in the world. So to think that we're giving that to the masses, I think it's a testament to just how generous you and I are, Soren.
Yeah, I think so.
I think we should pat ourselves on the back, frankly.
I think that as well. Tad's already off and running with the topics. I sent out if you follow me at Soren Petro, SorenPetro, or Rany at Jazayerli, and it's scrolls across the bottom of the screen, Jazayerli. You can see some of our topics. We always put it out beforehand. 9 of the top 11 payrolls made the playoffs. Casey likely will never spend like that. So the Major League Baseball is dead to me, Tad says, until they have a salary cap and a floor so that more teams can compete. And that is what we're going to talk about, is where the Royals need to be targeting this offseason. We've got the MLB Trade Rumors always does a great job of putting out their projections on what the arbitration numbers are going to be. We've got sites like Spotrac that track the contracts, and you can see who's under contract for next year. Rany, what do you think about where they sit, the kind of money they're going to spend? We're going to talk about what playoff payrolls spend, and Tad's right. He's done his research. What do you think about where the Royals sit right now?
Well, I don't know what to tell Tad. I mean, I'm sorry, but more teams can compete. We got 12 playoff teams, my friend. I don't know how many more teams you want. I mean, we have a San Diego Padres team that won 89 games and a Philadelphia Phillies team that won 87 games that are playing for the National League pennant. So this is baseball. Their solution to the payroll disparities between big market and small market teams is to let enough teams into the playoffs, and knowing that the playoffs are a crapshoot, that maybe the Royals can't be the Los Angeles Dodgers and win 111 games in a season. But you know where the Los Angeles Dodgers are right now? They're the same place you and I are. So, You know what? Get above 500. You're a contender. You make it to the playoffs. You can win the World Series. That's baseball. And that's something the NFL can't say. That's something the NBA can't say. Make the playoffs. You can absolutely win it all.
I noticed you didn't mention the NHL because it is something the NHL can absolutely say.
Yes, this is a good point. NHL and MLB, I think, share that in common. You don't want to be you don't have to be the best team. You want to be the hottest team. Although hottest is always a term we use looking backwards, because sometimes teams go into the playoffs cold as heck. The 2015 Royals, I think a losing record in September, righted the ship right before the playoffs, and we're fine. But the point is, make the playoffs. This isn't about building a juggernaut. This is about making the playoffs. Yes, 9 of the top 11 teams made the playoffs this year, but 3 of the teams that weren't in the top 11 made the playoffs. But let's get into some of the data. You've pulled up. We have a spreadsheet that you've put together here about playoff teams, where they rank in terms of payroll, and where the Royals have ranked in terms of payroll. And let's figure out what is the target here for a team that actually has designs on the postseason.
Yeah, and can I say this? I mean, to Tad's point, I mean, I agree with your point. That, hey, once you're there, you can win. But Tad's point is about getting there, right? Like, I think most people that are listening to us, right, are pretty hardcore baseball fans, and so they're pretty hip to the fact that, hey, yeah, anybody can make it happen once they're there, but getting there is important. And I think what you need to take from that is that the big market teams aren't just sitting back saying we'll just buy whatever we need. The big market teams are now playing smart baseball as well, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why it becomes even more incumbent, even more important, I guess that would be a better way to say it, for the Kansas City Royals to be a smart baseball team, right? To get into the analytics. I think John Sherman, I think that's part of the reason he made the decisions he's made in this offseason. And we certainly hope that J.J.Picollo is going to carry out those marching orders because he's looking at it saying, yeah, okay, maybe you're embracing it a little bit. You're not embracing it enough. Like, this is what it's going to take because the Red Sox now play smart baseball. The Yankees play smart baseball. Big payrolls. You have no choice. And to your point, it does need to be pointed out that this year's, what was Tad's numbers? 9 of the top 11, did he say?
You have 9 of the top 12. It's an accounting difference.
Yeah. So what I've got is, here are the payrolls in baseball this year that have made the playoffs. Number 1, the Mets. Number 2, the Dodgers. Number 3, the Yankees. 4, Phillies. 5, Padres. 5 highest payrolls made it. Okay. So that is a little scary. I can tell you, just going back to last year, 1, 2, and 5 made it, right? So 3 and 4 didn't make it last year. But Mets, Dodgers, Yankees, Phillies, Padres represent the top 5 payrolls in baseball. Then it's 8 Braves, 9 Astros, 11 Blue Jays, and 12 Cardinals. Okay. That's what made the top end. Below the league average, by the way, the league average payroll was $166 million. Below the league average was 21 Seattle Mariners with $128 million, 25 Tampa Bay Rays with $104 million, and 27 Cleveland Guardians, still fighting in this postseason. The Cleveland Guardians with an $82 million payroll. Your Kansas City Royals, for record keeping, spent the 24th most in baseball with $105 million. And as Rany said, there are a number of different ways to calculate this. I used the Spotrac numbers because it's a glorified Excel spreadsheet to begin with, which makes the copy and paste super easy for me to create my own spreadsheets with. So kudos to the folks over at Spotrac. And it includes different things. There's injured reserve, the 26-man. There's all these different things that go into it. They've got a category called buried and all this. I won't go into the nuances of it, but suffice it to say, this is pretty much what the teams were spending all around, all in. This is what they were spending. And the league average is $166 million. 3 teams were below it and significantly below it. And I think if you're the Kansas City Royals, who right now have $32 million on the books, and we're going to talk about some of these arbitration cases, probably another $33 million if you just take MLB trade rumors, who are smart people and have taken a shot at what the numbers will be, you're looking at about $65 million worth of commitments that the Royals have next year. The question is how to go about spending it, what to spend it on. And some of those arbitration guys might not even be ones you want to spend it on. But I think the moral of the story is, and I've done this all the way back to 2014. And, when the Royals were in the playoffs, I mean, just to contrast it of 2014, when the Royals got, broke through and finally got back to the playoffs. Number 1, Dodgers, by the way, with a $246 million payroll. And here we sit some 9 seasons later, or a 9th season, including the 14 season. And 282 is now tops. So there hasn't really been that much growth, to be honest with you, up at the top. I was kind of surprised at how that top. In fact, in 2015, the Dodgers were tops at $324 million. Right. So no one's even.
This is what happens. This is why the luxury tax is considered by, the players union as, they call it a soft cap, but it's becoming harder and harder in terms of cap. It's got a lot of teeth to it. Teams aren't willing. The richest teams aren't willing to spend much. And this is keeping payrolls down throughout the sport, which from a labor perspective is a problem. And that's why one of the reasons why we had such a contentious CBA negotiation this past winter. Because the top teams are capped and the bottom teams, especially bottom teams that are tanking or just not actively trying to win, are not picking up the slack. There is no salary floor, right? So that's part of the frustration. So I think, looking at the top salary, the Royals are never going to compare themselves to the number one salary in the sport. But I think comparing them to the median, to the average, I think is very relevant for them.
Yeah, no doubt. And by comparison, to go back to 2014 when the Royals broke through and made the playoffs, the payrolls that made it: number 1, Dodgers; number 4, Tigers; number 6, Angels; number 7, Giants; number 9, Nationals; number 11, Cardinals. So that meant there were 4 teams below the league average. Now we've got 2 more teams now. So who would have made it that year? I could go back and look at the standings and said, okay, if we had 2 more wild cards, who would have pushed on in there and look at what their payroll numbers were. But below the league average that year, 16 Baltimore, the Royals at 18 with 106 million, which is kind of surprising. 14, you kind of think of them as a little engine that could, and that then they started making some real money with some guys in 15 and 16. I think James Shields' contract probably weighed heavily on this part of the equation. But the Royals were 18. They were in the middle third of payrolls that year. Oakland A's at 22nd and the Pittsburgh Pirates at 28. There's always been a couple of teams down at the bottom. It should be pointed out, it's most often the Tampa Bay Rays and the Oakland A's that are carrying that weight. And so I think the idea has to become, if you truly believe that anybody can win once you get there, the A's and Rays are the only models to follow. If it's about getting yourself into the playoffs the most times and eventually you'll push forward, then you have to be following what they're doing. And that should be your driving goal, because those are the teams that consistently, handle business down at the bottom end of the payroll. And so what I found in this, just like over the years, like below league average, again, this is our first year of having, what do we had, 12 teams now? I guess it's 12 teams in the payroll or in the playoffs. Below league average. In 14, you had 4. In 15, you had 5. It was 5-5 the year the Royals won it. But in 16, there was only 1 below the league average. Right, that year was chocked with big market teams above it. Come back to 2017, 5 above, 5 below. Right, 2018, you had 3, 6, 7 above and 3 below. Next year, 6 above and 4 below, including the 30th, the smallest payroll in baseball, the Tampa Bay Rays in 2019. 20 was.
I throw out 20. They literally 10 of the 16 teams were actually below average. 2020. It's a unique season.
It is.
You don't want to, and there's 16 playoff teams instead of 10 or 12. I think I would just put that one aside.
I think that when in 21 there were 2 teams below the league average and 8 teams above, and then this year the fact that you have 9 above the league average and 3 below, it does seem to be trending towards spending makes a difference. And I think it's because everybody else in baseball is trending towards using the math.
Right. Well, there's a lot of things I want to cover here. One of them is the first. I think we have to take a step back and think about why teams have high payrolls or low payrolls to begin with. And my point is that when people say, well, you can't win unless you've got a high payroll, the poor teams can't compete. I think sometimes fans are guilty of confusing cause and effect. It's not simply that teams that spend money are good. It's that teams that are good have players worth spending money on. And I think that's something, it's an incredibly simple concept, but it actually explains a good chunk of this, because like you mentioned, you were surprised that the 2014 Royals actually ranked, 18th, right? In the middle third of teams with payroll, as the quote unquote little engine that could. Well, that's because they actually went out and got good players. They did trade for James Shields, and they had players on their own roster that were worth paying money towards, right? Whether it was Alex Gordon towards the end of his first big contract, and Salvador Perez was no longer massively underpaid; he was only slightly underpaid. Things like that. The point is, when you have good players, you're going to be able to spend money. So if you look at any season and the 30 teams, of the teams the 10 bottom teams in payroll, let's say maybe 5 of them are teams that are trying to do their best within the financial constraints that they have. But there are probably 5 teams every year that can afford to have much higher payrolls, but they know they suck. They're their goal is to suck. I mean, if you look at, let's say, the Houston Astros payrolls in 2011, 2012, 2013, they were among the lowest in the sport, and they were terrible. But which one caused the other? It was the fact that they were bad that caused their payrolls to be low. Obviously, once the team was, had developed a lot of young talent and was, capable of playing well, then their payrolls started to reflect that. But don't confuse the issue. So when you look at these numbers, I mean, you would never expect half the teams to be in the bottom half of payroll and half the teams to be in the top half on over a long term, because of the teams in the bottom half, probably half of those teams gave up before the season began, not because they don't have the money, but because they don't have the talent. So it's okay. Like, to me, an ideal split would probably be about 70-30. If you have, with now 12 playoff teams, I think if you have 8 coming from the top half and 4 from the bottom half every year, that is um, a system in which a small market team can still contend. So this year it was 9-3. So it was a little bit tilted towards the wealthier teams. Last year was 8 out of 10, but you go back to previous years, there were years where it's 5-5 or 6-4. So I don't look at this data and say, oh, the Royals or a small market team can't contend. But
in 2017, at the end of the Royals contending window, the Royals payroll ranked 13th in baseball. That was their highest payroll amongst that.
The only year they were above the league average. Yep.
Right. $159 million is where they were at. And so they spent up to that level. It should be pointed out. I think what's kind of interesting is, I've got a league average marker on my spreadsheet. And so we talk about above and below. What I think is a little bit troubling is, there for a while when I would do this, and I just eyeball it every year, right? And that's why I was like, okay, I got to put this. Actually, Jeff Passan, my baseball insider on my radio show, and obviously ESPN senior Major League Baseball insider, said, well, I'd like to know what those numbers are year over year. And so I was like, okay, I gotta actually do this. And so he drove me to actually put pen to paper and make the list. What it used to be was you'd get 4 out of the top 10, 4 out of the middle 10, and 2 in the bottom 10. Right. And I do think it's trending away from that middle 10. This year we've got 11, 12, and that's it. That's a little more troubling to me. Overall, last year in the middle 10, you had 11, 15, and 19, and then just 25. Right. So I do think that's the part that's a little bit scary there. But you're right. I mean, you have to have good players first. Right. And you do all the things that have been said in the comments. And by the way, if you're catching us via the podcast, you can be a part of the broadcast live. And if you're on Twitch, YouTube, or Facebook, you can comment in the chat room. Yes, you have to spend wisely. Yes, you need to develop. There's all those things, but that has to happen either way, right? Like that, you can bitch and moan about the payroll all you want, but no matter what, that has to happen. So that's a foregone conclusion. And so I don't irrelevant, right? Like they have to figure that part out. We're talking about, if you do spend it wisely, what is it going to take for them to get there and get back into it? And how long is it going to take for them to get back to where spending the amount of money that they're capable of spending will get them back into the playoffs?
Okay. Oh, there's one other wrinkle here. In defense of, and I don't want this to be taken as a defense of, oh, the Royals don't need to spend money, because I want them to spend money. Just like if they have money, I would much rather that go to a winning product on the field than to, the owner's bank accounts. They have every right to try and make a profit, but ideally they can do both. But there's one other advantage, which I bring up a lot on this podcast, and because it's such an obvious thing, but I think it's almost so obvious that people don't talk about it enough, which is the Royals play in the American League Central. And let's look again at the data here, but let's just focus on the AL Central champion, because this year, like you said, only 3 teams in the bottom half of payroll made the playoffs. You have at 21, the Seattle Mariners, a wild card team. At 25, the Tampa Bay Rays, a wild card team. And at 27, you have the Cleveland Guardians, the AL Central champion. Now, the AL Central was just completely what's the term? Bass Ackward. I
Yeah.
guess I can get away with saying that. This year, the White Sox, I think, were one of the highest payrolls in the game that didn't make the playoffs. I think they might have been in the top 10. The Guardians had actually the lowest payroll in the division and made the playoffs. But I mean, look back last year, the White Sox did win the division. They were 15th of the 10 playoff teams. They were 8th on that list. We'll skip 2020 because that was a bizarre year. 2019, who won the division? The Minnesota Twins. They were 18th in payroll. 2018, let's see here. The then Cleveland Indians, they were 13th in payroll. 2017, I believe it was also the Indians. They were 18th in payroll. 2016, when the Royals actually had, I believe, their highest payroll they've ever had the year after they won the World Series. 2017 was their highest. In 2016, though, they were close to the league average. They didn't win the division. Who won the division? The Cleveland Indians at 20th. So there's a consistent pattern here. I'm trying to find a playoff team from the American League Central that was in the top 10. You have to go back to 2014, the Detroit Tigers. The Detroit Tigers, before Mike Ilitch passed away, their previous owner, was willing to spend money commensurate with the talent that they had. And they had among the highest payrolls in the game. But that was 2014 you have to go back to. So playing in the AL Central is really the one fix that a team has for trying to consistently make the playoffs without a payroll in the top half of the sport. The Royals don't have to necessarily be in the top 15. I think they need to be in the top 20 when they're ready to win, but maybe not in the top 15 and almost certainly not in the top 10.
Yeah, and so now the question becomes, who do they spend it on? Right.
Well, because that's the good news, right? The flip side of that, which I guess is bad news, but kind of is good news, is that their payroll is not even at that level, right? I mean, this year, according this spreadsheet you put together, which I realize our readers don't have, our listeners don't have, but their payroll this year was 105 million through using the Spotrac method. And there's different methods of calculating payroll. This one includes things like pension obligations, so it doesn't necessarily correspond to some of the other ones you see. This one's useful for comparing one team to another, though. I think that's what we're looking at right now. And the league average was 166 million. They were at 105. They were at 66 or 63% of league average payroll wise. That is actually, according to the spreadsheet you put together, the lowest relative to the league, the lowest percentage of league average going back to at least 2014 when you started this data. And that's okay from the standpoint of, the Royals had a competitive window. This is, again, you don't win because you spend money. You spend money because you have winning players. When the Royals had that window from 2013 to 2017, they had payrolls that were around league average. 2017, they were at 99.9% of league average. And even in that was 2016. In 2017, it was 104%. But every year since, with the exception of the pandemic year, which is kind of bizarre, their payroll has gone down. And their payroll this year was slightly down from 2021, 106 million in 2021, 105 million in 2022, even as payrolls in the sport have been going up. And that is partly a result of this rebuilding process. And then this year, what came to fruition was all those rookies that we've talked about. One of the advantages of playing all these rookies is, well, rookies make the league minimum. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that their payroll has gone down. It's not a sign of the organization being cheap, but it is a sign that the organization has money to spend going forward.
Right. I think there are two ways to look at it. A couple things that I think need to be noted here by this organization. One, it was a bad season. Okay. And it didn't live up to expectations. Had you spent a bunch of money and you sucked, that would be even more concerning. Right.
True.
But I think also the idea that you thought this was going to be a contending year when you were having, throwing out the lowest payroll versus the league that you've had in the last, close to a decade. And I'll bet if we look at the 2013 payroll, that's when I get those numbers done as well. We'll find that's the case. I think part of the problem is that you've got to spend. And what I'm interested in, what I'd like to hear from J.J.Picollo at some point, and I haven't had a chance to chat with him, hoping to do that at some point, asked about doing that. We'll see if I get the opportunity. He's always been very generous with his time. I'm sure I will at some point. Very busy right now with the Royals. But, the idea of get all these great young players together and then we'll go spend, to me, is erroneous. At some point, you've got to figure out you've got to constantly, and I know they do. Here's every team. I've been privy to less and less nowadays, but every one of the professional teams in this town, Royal Sporting and Chiefs, they all have these boards. Here's our 22. Here's our 23. Here's our 24, and what's coming, right? And where and the one thing you've got to do is there's no point in bottoming out the spending if your goal is to contend continuously. And I really think that there's a big decision that has to be made. As Dayton Moore said to me in 2018, listen, when we build it back this time, I want to build it back for the long haul. I don't want to have highs, the ultimate highs and the ultimate lows. Okay, that's great. The Cardinals are your model, right? In some ways, the Rays are without spending. But to me, the Cardinals are the more realistic model. Win all the time, I think you'll pack $3 million plus into Kauffman Stadium or wherever they play for a long, long time. You'll be able to raise ticket prices. You're going to have more money earning, and you can sustain a higher payroll. And that needs to be the plan, the Cardinal approach, not the Rays approach, the Cardinal approach, spending money. But to do that, you don't just jump in one year, right? And go trade for a bunch of guys and sign a bunch of free agents that are all going to be up at exactly the same time, which is what happened to this franchise in 2017. I find it amazing that is what they preached, yet they have set up the exact same formula for having to pay everybody at the same time. And again, I go back to, you have to, I understand the comments like, well, the Royals haven't drafted well enough. They haven't to, I got it. That goes without saying. Yes, there's no doubt that those things have to be done right, okay? We can talk about it all we want. The bottom line is your spending should assume success in those categories. And when you're not, fire those people, replace them, because you're never going to get there without it. So that what we're talking about here is about how you allocate your resources. Every year there should be a free agent signing.
Yes.
Every year there should be a trade. Every year, because you don't, if you're building it for the long haul, right, Rany? If you're building it for the long haul, then every year, like this cannot be a year that we didn't do anything because our young guys aren't ready. No, you have to add somebody who's going to come off the books in 4 years so that next year you had somebody else who's going to come off the books in 4 or 5 years. And you've got to constantly be turning that over, or admit that you can't do that and go all in on a window, which is what they seem to be setting themselves up for right now. Right. That's why the purpose of this exercise is to see, okay, this is how their payroll is going to work and function, and then this is when it's going to crash. And if you aren't doing this kind of work in advance, you're not recognizing that you need to move some of these young players, right? You don't want to have 8, I know they're beating their chest about 9 guys debuting, and 4 or 5 of them will be good, but they'll all be free agents at the same time. That's what this should tell them.
Yes, I in general, I agree with what you're saying. So you said that the alternative, or they admit that this isn't going to work. Well, they can say that, but I would disagree. Like, that's the whole point of what you and I are talking about, is they can afford to go out and sign a free agent every year, right? Certainly, yes. where they are.
But that's the point. Right, don't spend $100 million.
Right. Well, here's the issue. Like, you not only is it if you don't do it that you're all these guys are.
And by the way, just sorry to interrupt you again, but to clarify, don't spend $100 million on top of the 65 that you're pretty much already obligated to. Don't just go like, okay, 165 is where we got to get to, so we're going to blow $100 million right now. It's start, strategically.
Exactly. That's sort of my point. It's not just if you don't do anything this year and you say, well, wait until we're ready to contend. Not only do you have the issue of, like you said, all these guys that they do have right now are going to be free agents at the same time. To me, the bigger issue is if you don't sign one quality free agent to a long-term deal this year, then next year, if you think you're ready to contend, you have to go out and sign 2. All right? Like, you want to be the key to success on the free agent market is to be shrewd with who you sign, right? Is to be judicious, is to be wise. There may only be one quality free agent on the market in any given year that fits your profile to a T, right? So if you go out and you're like, we're going to sign 3 or 4 guys this offseason, there are some offseasons there aren't 3 or 4 guys in the whole market that are actually going to end up being smart free agent signings. And, the history of teams that go and blow all the money in what certainly smaller market teams. I remember, the then Florida Marlins notoriously going out and signing, I think it was, Jose Reyes, Mark Burley. There was at least one of their, like, 3 premier free agents, and they traded all 3 of them within like 18 months because that's what the Marlins do. And guess what? If there's any team that has set themselves up for never having an extended run of success, it's the Marlins. If there's one good guy out there in any given free agent year, make that your target. Every year you're going to have a ranking. If you can get the number 1 guy on your list, maybe you can get the number 2 guy. But the point is, if you wait and then next year you're like, well, we need to sign 2 or 3 guys, we're ready to contend, you're going to be scraping closer to the bottom of the barrel of free agents. So you want to, and certainly where the Royals are with their payroll, I think we need to talk about that. I didn't appreciate before doing the research for today's podcast just how big a gap there is between their projected payroll for next year and where they've been just to get to the level they were this year. So I'm going to switch the method that we're calculating payroll now to the one that you'll see at like Baseball Reference, which doesn't include the pension benefits, just because it's easier for us, because we know what Salvador Perez is making as his contract for next year. I don't know what the pension obligations are. So we can add, just comparing apples to apples. So this year's payroll, which with the pension benefits.
Sorry, what was the source again?
Like baseballreference.com. Okay. There are a few others that use the same concept. It's just basically you're just taking the reported salary for every player on the 26-man roster. A lot of places will use 28 men, because most teams will have 2 guys on the injured list at any given time. But just looking at their salaries, adding them up. So like this year, the Royals, their payroll from Spotrac was $105 million, but just adding up the contracts method, I think it was like $95 million. And that's my understanding is 10 to 11 million is roughly the pension. So that makes sense. So the Royals this past year, their opening day salary, and it's important to look at opening day salary because, of course, if you're bad, you trade guys during the season, your payroll will go down. But and that makes it look like, well, gee, you can't win because you didn't spend money. No, actually, you were bad because you didn't spend money because you were bad because you traded those guys mid-year. So this includes, Carlos Santana, Andrew Benintendi, Whit Merrifield. Like that's one of the reasons why their payroll is projected to go down next year is those 3 guys combined were making $26 million. The Royals traded all of them during the season. They're all not on the books for next year. And the Royals have 11 guys currently on their roster that are arbitration eligible for 2023. And those 11 guys, I think you brought it up, are projected by MLB Trade Rumors to make $32.6 million. But let's look at that list real quick because some of those guys, frankly, shouldn't be making that much. And frankly, if they're not willing to take a lower salary, should probably be let go. I mean, the number 1 guy on that list, the most expensive of those 11 guys, Brad Keller at $7 million. Do you want to pay Brad Keller $7 million?
No.
For 1 year when there's no, it'd be one thing if a guy still has club control past the following year, because you can argue, well, if he plays well, not only do we keep him, but then we have the option to keep him in the future. Like Nicky Lopez at $3.4 million, that might be a guy that fits into that. I don't know if Nicky was under contract just for 1 more year at 3.4, maybe you say that's not worth it. But if he gets back closer to the form he showed last year when he hit 300, you're going to want to be able to keep him under arbitration for, I think 2 years after next season. So maybe Nicky Lopez, you bring him back, but that's another guy you would consider. So Scott Barlow at 4.9. Yeah, you'll bring him back. Luke Weaver at $3 million. I mean, that's the Royals. I think they're going to be tempted to, because if they cut him, they're just acknowledging they traded Emmanuel Rivera for like 18 innings of a bad reliever, and that they're going to have some egg on their face. But frankly, that's one of those guys you go to him like, we're not going to let you go to arbitration. If you want to, we'll give you $2 million, $1.5 million, pick a number, get him to agree to terms ahead of time, knowing that if he doesn't agree, he's going to be cut loose and the market may not be nearly as, rewarding to him. So there's another guy. They have Brady Singer at $2.9 million. Yeah, you bring him back, of course. Adalberto Mondeis at $3 million. God, they're going to bring him back. I mean, it's $3 million. If there's a 1% chance he's a superstar, well, maybe that's worth taking. But I get it. Amir Garrett at 2.6. I like Amir Garrett. I thought he had a good year. He's probably the only, dominant lefty, potentially dominant lefty on the bullpen. Fine, 2.6 million. I'd bring it back. Kris Bubic at 1.8 million. We're starting to get into numbers that are so low that it's worth bringing these guys back almost no matter what. But of course, Ryan O'Hearn at 1.5 million. I don't think so.
No.
Right. So so you have these guys now. There's 3 guys under contract. Only 3 guys, think about it, who actually have a contract, guaranteed contract for next year. Salvador Perez at 20 million, and of course, everybody's favorite guy number 2 on the list, Hunter Dozier at 7.5, and then Michael Taylor in the last year of his contract's at 4.5. Right, so that's 32 million guaranteed. We talked about 32.6 on the books for these 11 arbitration guys estimated. If you calculate for a 28-man roster, that leaves 14 players. Half the roster will be guys making roughly the league minimum, pre-arb guys, as the roster is right now. I'll round up to $11 million combined for all of those guys. You add that all up, that's $75.6 million from $95 million this year. And that's without cutting any of the guys we talked about on the bubble. If you just let go of Keller and O'Hearn and brought in league minimum guys, that would save you $7 million. And that 75 gets down to about $68.5 million. So the Royals are going to have a payroll right now that is somewhere in the range of $25 million less than this year. One other thing, of course, Zach Greinke is a free agent, right? That's a big part of it. And maybe they'll bring him back, although it probably won't be for $13 million. I think they'll probably get him for less. But also keep in mind, inflation. I mean, I don't think I am, surprising anybody by saying that inflation is at its highest rate that it's been in decades. That is going to affect, what a baseball team, charges in terms of tickets. It affects what their payroll is going to be. I assume if payrolls go up with inflation, that 95 million should be closer to 102, 103 million next year. And that's just to keep pace with where they were, which this year was 24th in baseball. If they actually feel like they are taking a step towards contention, you could argue it should be 110, 115 million. So bare minimum, the Royals can add the bottom line. What can they do with their payroll between now and opening day next year? Bare minimum, I think they can add $30 million, and they could add more if they want to be aggressive. But $30 million is a lot of money to play with. There's a reason why you and I have talked about
30 to just get back to last year's number. You're
30,
saying? No,
30 would get us to, and it depends. I mean, if they're aggressive,
cost of living increase off
a cost of living increase, and that, but it could be more than 30 if they get aggressive with Keller and Luke Weaver, and O'Hearn. Let's say they keep Nicky Lopez around, but they get aggressive and release those other guys. That's probably more like 35 million.
Let's come back to the list of arbitration players again, because we go by it and everybody, and I put up a number of ones. People are the O'Hearn's got to go and all this. Luke Weaver, $3 million. Luke Weaver this year for the Kansas City Royals hung a 5.59 ERA for the year between here and Arizona. It was a 6.56. Okay. And again, ERA is not the best measurement of pitchers. I get it in the advanced analytics world, but we all get the scale. So it speaks to all of us. Next up on the list, Amir Garrett. You mentioned Amir Garrett. You kind of like Amir Garrett, but Amir Garrett had a 4.96 ERA the year after he had a 6.04 ERA. He's 30 years old. There is no problem. I mean, if you believe in him, fine, keep him. But there is no reason to believe you have to keep him. Adalberto Mondeis, we all know the story on that one. Brad Keller, you mentioned $7 million, and Keller has now hung a 5.09 after a 5.39. Okay. Next up on the list, Scott Barlow, $4.9 million. We all agree, keep him. Ryan O'Hearn, we know the story. No. Nicky Lopez, we know the story, 3.4. Swell guy in the clubhouse, versatile. I actually think they will keep him, and I actually don't mind that, because I think there are some skills. Taylor Clark, $1.5 million for Taylor Clark.
Given the league minimum, keep in mind the league minimum is 720, so it's essentially another $800,000 over league minimum. Taylor Clark he came back right at the end of the season, but He had 8 walks and 48 strikeouts. Anybody who can have a strikeout to walk ratio of 6 with Cal Eldred as their pitching coach, I'm ready to put him in the Royals Hall of Fame. So
for that number, I'm good. I'm with you. Josh Staumont for $1 million, yes. Brady Singer, $2.9 million, yes. In fact, Brady Singer should be Atlanta Braved to a contract extension, and if they don't, then we have to start scratching our head. Right. What's really going on
The
here?
issue when we talk about how do they spend that money, right? There's two obvious. One, the obvious thing is, okay, you spend on free agency, but the sneakier alternative is start giving out some long-term deals to guys where maybe you front load the contracts a little bit.
Yes.
Right. And I think that's something we can talk about. Brady Singer is an obvious example. Vinny Pasquantino, we've talked about. To me, those are the two guys I think that you really want to target as a way, because you need to spend that money. And I would love for them to go out and sign 2 premier free agents. But if they can sign 1 premier free agent at $20 million a year kind of player, and yeah, I know that sounds crazy, but do the math. Look at the payroll. They can do that and still have money to go out and give Singer, Pasquantino deals, and maybe they get a couple $1,000,000 each as a signing bonus, as well as a higher payroll figure in 2023 in exchange for more manageable amounts in 2025 and 2028 or whatever.
Is that all of them? Bubic and Bubic. I know 558 is not good, but we've seen enough out of Bubic. Enough good days of Bubic that I have no problem if Kris Bubic is going to.
He's young, and you have him for 4 more years. You're not going to cut that guy over $1.8 million.
No. So I think the first thing that has to be done is we can breeze by it, but it's going to be one of the first. Maybe it won't be one of the first because you don't really get around to arbitration until after the first of the year. But if Ryan O'Hearn is back, alarms go off. They go off. Huge alarms. Because it means nothing has changed. Right. It means literally nothing has changed. If Luke Weaver is back, alarms go off.
I think, to me, what I could see with Luke Weaver, the argument I'll give you for Luke Weaver is this: is his FIP this year was 2.69. It was 2.68 in Arizona and 2.7 with the Royals. I'm surprised too, but he actually had peripherals, you could argue, that are better than his ERA. But that said, I would not give him $3 million.
Good Lord, he did, didn't he?
Yeah, Jesus. I could, but he's the kind of guy where, again, an organization that isn't coddling its players, that isn't so player friendly that it loses touch with reality sometimes, would go to him and say, "Look, we like you, which is the reason we traded for you, but your performance does not justify the kind of figure that you're going to get in arbitration. We'll give you $1.5 million. We'll give you $2 million. Sign now, or take your chances on the free agent market."
I'm sorry. There's no way. I don't even care, because there's just no way with a whip that high that you go, okay, it makes sense. Because this is the first time I've looked at FIP and gone, well, this is useless, because he had a 4.42 FIP fielding independent pitching, which is scaled out to look kind of like ERA, right? That's kind of the scale you should have in your head if you're new to hearing that stat. But his whip is walks plus hits divided by innings pitched, which is basically just your base runners, not hit batsmen, but your base runners you're giving up. The year before was a 1.188. Like, that's a good whip. And he had a bad FIP. Now he has a god-awful whip and a good FIP.
But the reason for that is not because he was suddenly walking the ballpark. It was because he was giving up just an absurd number of hits.
Yeah, but Rany, 8 walks in 19 in the third innings is walking the ballpark.
It's on the 2022 Royals, it's probably above average. But beyond that, do you know what his batting average on balls in play was this year? Take a wild guess.
Something like 550 or something.
No. I don't know if anybody in the history of baseball done a 550, but it was
410.
429.
Okay.
Like, that is like, the typical pitcher will have a batting average on balls in play of around 300. I think it's actually even like 290 now in baseball.
It was like 305 back in
the day. It's come down. Well, the shift has had an effect on that, right? That's one of the things that we've seen. But the one of the most important insights that analytics has brought us in the last 20, 25 years is this idea that pitchers have a pretty limited impact on batting average on balls in play. Yes, we have spent way too much time discussing Luke Weaver. I agree. But the point here is simply that pitchers don't have much control of that. So when your BABIP is 429, he's probably been unlucky. Whereas Ryan O'Hearn, as an example, there's no evidence that he's been unlucky. He's just not that good, particularly for a guy who doesn't offer any defensive value. So anyway, whether or not they bring back Luke Weaver, they're going to have money to spend. Like, I don't want to lose the forest for the trees
Right.
here. There's money to spend. They almost need to spend it because, again, if you don't spend any of that money this year, the payroll isn't expected to go up that much more a year from now. Michael Taylor comes off the books. I think Hunter Dozier still has one more year in his contract.
Rany, a year from now, there are only 3 players under contract.
2. There's 3 this year. There's only 2 players next year, Dozier and Salvador Perez.
That's
and
right.
Then,
yes.
And the year after that, it's just Salvador Perez. The point is that
unless the $10 million option on Hunter Dozier is picked up.
This is absolutely true, and I look forward to seeing your reaction the day that happens. But my point is, like, the payroll isn't going to go up that much naturally, whereas payroll throughout the sport, like everything else in the world, will go up over time. So they have to. The payroll has to go up just to keep up with the Joneses, and so you've got to spend that money. So I think that there is room. They can bring back Zach Greinke and still sign another free agent. And maybe it's not a $25 million a year guy, although if they can get Trey Turner, if they can get Carlos Correa, I think I don't expect them to sign those guys. I would be thrilled if they did, but I would like to, for the first time, hear a rumor that the Royals are actually trying. You know what? Try. Like, yes, there's no reward for trying and failing. But what's so frustrating sometimes as a Royals fan is that there's just an assumption on the part of everybody, including the Royals themselves, that if there's a certain level of free agent where it's like if the free agent's above that line, the Royals aren't even in consideration. They're not even going to try themselves. And I think that's a defeatist mentality. The Royals have a huge asset when it comes to spending money, which is they've got a ton of young players making the major league minimum for the next year or two. Maybe, like you said, they should trade some of those guys. I think that's something that they should absolutely consider. But they've got so many of them that even if they trade 1 or 2, they still are going to have a huge advantage of a bunch of guys making 6 figures in their everyday starting lineup. That is an enormous asset, which is only properly exploited if you actually spend money somewhere else.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think they've got to, that's why I come back to you have to look big picture. And that's part of what the smart clubs do. And that's part of the analytics of it is not just, we just get as many players to the big leagues as we can. And then we figure out what to do once they're all here. I mean, that's like 1970s attitude. Like, you have to know who the good players are. Like, you have to know who's going to make it. Like the Royals have functioned somewhat, old school baseball functioned as though it's, we just plant as many seeds as we can and we water it and we love it as much as possible. And the new baseball goes spin rate. This guy's a player. This guy's not. This, exit velocity, launch angle. This guy can hit the ball over the wall. This guy can't. Right? Like, that's where it has to get. Yes. And as I dubbed it earlier this year, the Make-A-Wish Foundation, it granting the wishes of so many young kids to be able to say that they were a big league ball player. Yay. Look at this. Joey's here. We delivered what we told the parents. And listen, and I don't mean to demean in any way, shape, or form the Royals, building great relationships with families and being able to sign players, but it has to turn into winning. Right. And that's what's not happening right now. It's not, and it theoretically should turn into guys staying, and that didn't happen with the last wave, right? And that's the next thing as we talk about what's to spend. And you mentioned it could be spending on guys now. You cannot have the ones who did achieve, and to me the 2 that if you're going to be analytically driven, it is your man Vinny Pasquantino, and it's Brady Singer. And those 2 should be the ones that are signed, even ahead of Bobby Witt Jr., who I'm sure is what they're thinking. It's what they were asked about, what J.J.Picollo was asked about in his press conference. But those 2 flags need to be stuck in the ground with those 2, right? Like, that's what needs to happen. You need to begin showing that we have signed, we have developed, we have drafted, signed, developed, and finished players, and now they stay.
Right. That's the dream. That's the small market model that they claim to stuck by. Well, now's the time to actually, like you said, plant your flag in the ground. And to me, those two are very clearly, the two guys who warranted it. And, a year from now, the hope is, maybe MJ Melendez takes a step forward offensively. Maybe Michael Massey takes a step forward. And, there's still time to sign these guys. Michael Massey, a year from now, will still be 2 years away from arbitration. He was a 4th-round pick. He didn't get like massive money. So there's still going to be time to do that. But it's kind of hard to sign 10 guys to long-term deals in one offseason. So for the same reason that you want to start with the free agent signings now, you probably want to start in judiciously picking the right guys to give long-term extensions to while they're still amenable to it. Maybe Brady Singer is not, although, he's 4 years away from free agency. I think his mentality fits with the organization. And I think that they're willing to give him the money, but certainly Vinny Pasquantino, I think is just a no-brainer because he has a chance for him to get set himself up for life. And I think it's a great deal for the Royals too. So,
by the way, friend of the pod and still the only man ever to fill in on the Kaufman Corner podcast, David Lesky from his Inside the Crown blog took a runner at it on his latest, I don't know if it's his latest, but it's one of them. I found it really quickly because I thought it was a great piece. He took a shot at what it would take for Pasquantino, goes through a detailed, talking about Freddie Freeman as a comp. And he came in at basically signing him 6 years, $27 million.
Right. If that's without buying out any years of free agency.
Right.
So that's I think
really like 7 or 8.
Right. Well, you probably
maybe you give him options on the end of that.
Maybe you give him one additional. I mean, for him, he's the advantage of that is that maybe he gets a guarantee beyond the 6 years before free agency. You probably want to give him at least 1 year. So maybe it's 7 years and $40 million, $45 million. And then you get 2 or probably even 3 club options. So, you can go to the fans and say, we have this guy potentially for a decade. And Vinny Pasquantino's like, I get $40 million no matter what happens, right? Like and you know what, $40 million, especially over the course of 7 years, even the worst case scenario is still something the Royals can fade. They can overcome it. I mean, the Hunter Dozier contract is close to the worst case scenario for what happens when you sign one of your guys to a long-term extension. It's an annoyance, in part because Hunter Dozier has performed so badly that I'm not sure he should be on the roster regardless of salary. So that you have the risk of compounding the money by actually wasting a roster spot and playing time on the guy. But the Royals can overcome the Hunter Dozier contract. So the worst case scenario there for the Royals is very manageable. And I think the upside is you have a guy that is already a fan favorite, a guy who's already shown elite hitting skills. I don't know if you know this. Vinny Pasquantino this year had 10 home runs, and he had more walks than strikeouts, correct?
Yes.
Do you know how many players this century, as rookies, how many rookies in the 21st century have done those two things? Forget playing time and limited, just double-digit home runs as a rookie with more walks than strikeouts.
3.
0. The last player before Vinny Pasquantino to have 10 or more home runs as a rookie and more walks than strikeouts was Brian Giles in 1997.
Wow.
It's in 25 years. Brian Giles wasn't his debut. He was actually he'd played parts of 2 seasons. He was barely a rookie. But also, go look at Brian Giles' Baseball Reference page one day. He remains an unbelievably underrated player because from that point on, he was like 25 as a rookie. For the next 7 or 8 years, he was an absolute masher. I think he ended up with like 57 WAR, which is like borderline Hall of Fame consideration kind of guy. Brian Giles was a hell of a player. Before Brian Giles, Alvin Davis in 1984 is the last player. So Brian Giles is the only guy in the last, and he was very good. He aged quickly, and Alvin Davis might be, I don't want to say a cautionary tale, but he was a guy who, like Pasquantino, wasn't quite as athletic, more of a first base DH type, but was a tremendous hitter for like 6 years and then fell off a cliff. If that's the worst case scenario, if Vinny Pasquantino, you sign him in the last year or 2 of his contract, he's not worth it. You'll manage. But the point is to point out the rarity of what Vinny has done, especially in an era. Strikeouts there's a reason nobody's done it 25 years because strikeouts are so much higher today than they were in the 1990s. And Pasquantino the strikeout rate didn't affect him at all. And that's counting a slow start in his career. I mean, the first month and a half of his career, he struggled. From like August 1st on, he was an absolute terror. So yeah, let's get this guy signed. Let's get Brady Singer signed, and let's go out and spend some money on a free agent. There's my wish list for you.
Yeah. Any final thoughts?
Oh, and also throw some money at coaches. While we're talking about this, you know what? Let's spend some money on the best coaching in the game.
Yeah. We sit, we wait, to find out what they're going to do with that coaching staff. I hear people say that there are going to be more additions. I really hope so, because I don't think it can just be change out Matheny and Eldred and now we're ready to go. I really hope more changes are coming, but I think we've made the point that, spending money, they don't have to get to $165 million, but the idea that you're not going to add anyone to this ball club right now, it just doesn't make any sense.
To me, they have an opportunity. This isn't even about me complaining about them not spending money. It's more, I want to frame this as they have an opportunity to win in this division soon. And precisely because they can win soon, they should abandon the mentality of those teams at the bottom of the payroll chart because they're not ready to win. So why would you spend money if you're not ready to win? The Royals are no longer in that category as far as I'm concerned. If not in 2023, then certainly by 2024. And you can't spend all the money in one offseason. So they need to prepare for 2024 now. And that means judiciously finding free agents that will help this team. And like you say, potentially looking to package some of the many, many rookies that they have. Maybe some of the guys that they don't necessarily are as high on as the others. Don't just throw them away like Emmanuel Rivera for a reliever, but actually package them and try and maybe you get a guy who's making a lot of money, but is actually a good, valuable player in his prime.
And if nobody is willing to sign with you because you're not good enough, then this is the year that you trade for salary.
Potentially,
Right?
yes. I think
guys.
one of the sort of fringe benefits of making the wholesale changes you have on the coaching staff in the front office is you might entice people to come to Kansas City, a new Royals organization that might have been looking at this organization with a lot of skepticism over the last couple of years, especially on the pitching side of things.
Yeah, I think that's the bottom line here. The time is now, right? The time.
I think it is, and I say that from a standpoint of optimism. I think that there is a window here that is closer than maybe people think, but it requires the Royals to not just sit on their laurels and say, well, we're just going to hold back and save, keep our powder dry for the future. I think you can shove some of that powder into the gun now, fire off a few rounds, and reload next year.
That's right. All right, Rany, great stuff as always, buddy. Appreciate it. We'll do it again next Sunday. If you are joining us here on the stream, make sure you hit that like button, the love button. It doesn't cost you nothing, but it does a lot of good for us. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast and to the videos at YouTube, Facebook, Twitch and YouTube, where you can subscribe. We appreciate it very much. Thank you very much for joining us here on Kaufman Corner.